I'm a 17-year-old high school guy with a weak body. I live in a small town in the Philippines, and this town is surrounded by rice fields with a highway going straight across it. Part of my usual weekend routine is to go jogging early in the morning, sometime around 5 a.m. My usual jogging route is from my house somewhere in the middle of town to a small hill with a wonderful view of the town in the morning. To reach my destination, I would have to jog on the side of the highway. From time to time, a fog that lasts about an hour would appear on the highway. And once you're inside of it, you could see only about 10 or 15 feet before it all goes white. So one Saturday, I decided to jog. I invited one of my friends to join me since he follows the same route anyway. We left home at 5 a.m. and proceeded to the highway as usual. A thick fog blanket at the highway because that would pass had their lights on. And there were several one-ways because of the road repairs. As we entered the fog, we decided to jog along the side of the road and pass a couple of roadworks. All was well at that point. A bit exhausted, but otherwise fine. We barely encountered anybody else, and usually they're just fellow joggers, too. Then we came across another roadwork and we saw this guy crouched down on the asphalt. He was wearing a dirty orange vest. And similarly dirty hard hat. We couldn't see his face, but we decided to ignore it. He looked as if he was fidgeting with something in his hands. So we thought he was just holding a few tools or something. Also, there was nobody there. But us, myself, my friend and that guy. The fog was still thick as hell. My friend signaled me to keep a distance from the guy and I followed him. When we got closer, we heard him humming a strange tune under his breath, which in itself wasn't that weird. But boy, were we wrong. As we got closer and closer to the guy, he started acting erratically. He stopped for a moment as I passed him. Then he started laughing. It wasn't a regular laugh. It sounded sinister and a little dry. It was pretty loud. So it really freaked us out. We didn't increase our speed at that point, as we thought he was just toying with us. But he didn't stop. He just kept laughing and laughing. And we knew what was beyond a prank. I can't describe his laugh more than I just did. But trust me, he wasn't faking it. We didn't look back, we were speeding up. Now, as we were starting to see the hill, I was gasping for air. But I didn't know what would happen if I stopped. I just forced myself to keep running and running. And my friend did the same. He was probably 50 meters behind us when I decided to look at him. He had stopped laughing. But now he was standing straight and was glaring at us. He called out to us in an enraged tone. That's when the adrenaline kicked in. We just ran and ran until we reached the hill. In hindsight, I don't know how I was able to push myself that far for so long. When we finally reached the top of the hill, we were exhausted. I nearly collapsed on a cement bench and stayed there for another hour. Like a breath of fresh air. My friend laughed in a more comedic manner. And I followed suit. We left the whole thing off while waiting for the fog to lift. When it did, we walked home. I hadn't had breakfast yet, so I was pretty hungry. As we passed the roadworks where we saw the guy, he was no longer there. The only people that were wearing construction outfits were the ones signaling the traffic, but none looked like the man we saw. As I got home, I told my parents what happened and they said it was probably just another nut job. That's still a construction outfit. Since then, I've never gone jogging into a fog again. Thanks for reading and highway guy. Let's not meet ever. So this was quite a while ago. I'd say about 11 or 12. When this happened one night, my mom and I had decided to get food from a pizza place around us. That was close, but not close enough that they would deliver to us. The trip there was fine. We got our food handled. We're on our way home when we decided to stop at a gas station. When leaving the gas station, a dark burgundy car pulled out behind us. At first, obviously, this didn't raise any red flags. But as we kept going and getting closer to home, this car was still following us. And we were starting to get freaked out. It followed us the whole way home. Once we got home, we pulled in. And this car just stopped in the middle of the road a bit behind us. My mom told me not to get out of the car. We sat there for about 10 minutes, until finally, the car decided to drive past us. I was so scared. I didn't look at the car. I didn't want to see who was in it. They turned at the next block. My mom told me to get out of the car and to run to the house as fast as I could. Because she was worried they were just going to drive around the block. We got out, ran to the house and locked the door. I don't know if they ever came back. And I never saw that car again. It was one of the creepiest things to ever happen to us. So I think it was around 2018 to 2019 when this happened. I don't really remember the year. But I remember everything leading up to the moment in vivid detail. I used to live on a farm for a few years. I moved away a while ago. But one day my aunt was going to take the people who worked on the farm back home as they didn't live there. And she asked me if I wanted to come with. I said yes. About 30 minutes before we went, I saw her figure in the kitchen doorway. It was crouched down on all fours almost in an animalistic way. I couldn't make out any facial features or anything. I only know it had an almost feminine build. Long black hair, black eyes that I could only see the glance in the dark of deer antlers protruding from its head. After that, I was obviously freaked out. But fast forward to after we dropped the workers off at their houses. We were on our way back home. And I swear I saw something crawling across the road. Before the pickup truck, we were in flipped in Rome. Luckily, neither of us were seriously hurt in that accident. Neither of us sustained long-term injuries that were going to cause us problems later in life. But it traumatized the hell out of me. Can anyone maybe give an explanation of what I saw that day? I have been looking for answers ever since. This happened 2 years ago when I was 19. I'm now in my mid-20s. I still remember this very clearly because of how creeped out I was. Back then, I was living 600 plus miles away from my parents in a different state. Even though there was a distance, my mom and I still talked on the phone at least twice a week. And we were still really close. So when we found out her cancer was back, I didn't think twice about dropping everything to drive down to see her. A plane ticket would be too expensive. And I had a 10-year-old Toyota that might have been a bit beat up. But it still got me from A to B cheaply and quietly. My parents weren't thrilled at the idea of me driving the 11 hours by myself, but my mind was made up. So they offered me a deal. I would stop at every rest stop every 2 to 3 hours to stretch my legs and call them, and in exchange for this courtesy they would pay for my gas. If I didn't call within the 3-hour window though, they would assume I'd been in an accident and call me repeatedly, interrupting the audio or podcast that they knew I would have on. I accepted the deal. And that's why I was at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. This was actually one of the nicer stops, well-lit, multiple vending machines that didn't have huge cages around them. The payphone wasn't broken, and it looked clean. There were a couple of cars there with people sleeping in them. I still had 15 minutes before I had to check in with my parents. I got out of my car and stretched, and then almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a man's voice right behind me. "Miss, can I ask you a favor?" I turned around, and he's leaning against my car. I have no idea how we got there so fast. I didn't see him when I parked. But there he was, uncomfortably close to me. He looked to be in his 40s. He didn't look dirty or twitchy. He was too close. But his body language wasn't screaming, threatening. And even though I was 19 years old, barely over 5 feet, and at that point in my life, 110 pounds soaking wet. And even though I'd already been judged on a lot of true crime media, and knew the dangers of a girl my age alone at night with an out-of-state license plate, my dumbass asked what he needs. He told me that he accidentally locked his keys and his phone in his truck. And if he could just borrow my phone real quick to call his friend, it would just take a second and it would really help him out. And I almost handed him my phone. I was reaching into my pocket to hand it to him with a Pollyanna, "No problem." And then I actually looked at his face. Like I said, this rest stop was surprisingly well left. And this guy looked really normal. Except for his eyes. He had dead sharp guys, you know what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy Dick Cheney actress in a Glade commercial who's trying to convince her she's in love with a dumbass who doesn't know how air fresheners work. Eyes, they're smiling, with the eyes are vacant and creepy. And staring way too hard. I got that feeling. That runaway feeling. I knew immediately not to hand this guy, my only way to call for help. So I put on my best customer service smile and told him, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. But I don't have a charger. I need to save all my battery for the tracking app and my parents have on my phone. And I need that juice to call my parents, which I actually have to do right now. But good luck." And I turned and walked about 20 feet away. And he doesn't leave. He was still just leaning against my car watching me. And now I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car because he creeped me out. And he has a serial killer face. So going to the bathroom is out. But I also wanted to get away from him, prove I'm not going to help. And maybe he'll leave. And I could technically get into the car. But I would have to get really close to him unless I crawled over my passenger side seat. And he's not moving. So I did the first thing that popped into my mind. I called my dad, and my dad, for the first time that night, did not pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail, I glanced back. The guy still hadn't moved. He was just staring at me. So I faked a phone conversation with my dad. I angled my body so that the guy couldn't see that I'd hung up the phone and loudly said I should be home in about 30 minutes, when in reality, I was still at least 4 hours away. I mentioned exactly where I was and reassured the fake caller that this was a good rest stop with plenty of lighting, and a couple of visible security cameras. That guy still hadn't moved. And I'm running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a lot of things I could have said while pretending to talk to my dad. But in that moment, I was beginning to seriously freak out and my mind went blank. So I hung up and didn't know what to do. I had hoped the fake phone call would scare him off, but he was still leaning against my car. I stalled for another couple of minutes. I bought cookies from the vending machine. I walked around a little bit. And at this point, he's been leaning against my car staring at me for at least 10 minutes. I honestly debated waking up one of the men sleeping in their parked cars and asking them for help. And just the thought of having to wake someone up to help me to get into my own damn car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling and headed back to my car. I decided that unless he touched me, I'm just going to pretend he isn't there. He waited until I was unlocking my car before he started talking to me again. He told me again that he really needs to use my phone. He's stranded here unless he can call his friend to bring the spare keys. He's not angry or begging. His voice sounds weirdly friendly. But he's been creepily watching me for way too long while blocking my exit. So I'm not falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone just in case I'm wrong about this. And I was being a bitch to a guy who needs help. But then he leaned forward as I was getting in, and I lost all nerve and slammed and locked the door as fast as possible. He didn't move until I started the car and put it in reverse. And then he finally stepped back and let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I was so focused on getting away from him. And then halfway out of the rest stop, my mom called me, my mom, who would freak out if I don't pick up, and he was already sick, and I needed to put on my seatbelt. I could still see him in my mirror. He was standing right next to where I was parked with his back to me. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking again to answer the phone. But I kept my engine running. And I kept watching him. I don't want my mom to worry. So I told her everything's fine. Where I was my ETA. Now that I was in my locked car away from him, I was beginning to feel like I overreacted. She scolds me about speeding, and I tune her out because the guy is moving now. As my mom lectures me about road safety, I watched the guy cross to a truck, unlock the door, and get in. The keys being locked in no longer seemed to be an issue for him. I watched the truck hit back out to the freeway and drive out of sight. I had to pretend to be fine to not upset my mom. I didn't get back onto the road for another 20 minutes. And when I didn't speed. I did not want to see that truck. I found out years later that the closest city to that rest stop has a major problem with sex trafficking. And that girls who look like they don't live nearby, or maybe look like they're living out of their cars, tend to be targets. I don't know if that was what was happening, or if he was just trying to scare me into handing over my phone. Either way, creepy guy at the rest stop. Let's not meet again. When I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, I lived across the street from Camp Randall, the football stadium. On game days, they shut our street down and people would flood it drinking and partying. We'd sit on our porch and drink beers and Bloody Marys with the crowd at 9 in the morning. Good times. But one day, there was this girl walking briskly up the sidewalk, sobbing, makeup smeared all over her face. She was covered in dirt, like she'd been rolling around in it head to toe. She didn't look beaten or anything that might have suggested a bra, just covered in dirt. And the thing was, she was dressed for game day, all decked out in her Bucky Badger stuff. And she had her hair up in middle bonds. Whatever happened to her had just happened. And given that she was, despite her condition, a very attractive girl, our minds went to the worst place, that she'd been sexually assaulted. I lived in a big house with 7 guys and a girl. At the time, it was just the guys on the porch. And given what we feared might have happened, we called for our female roommate to see if the girl needed help. The girl just shook her head, said I'm fine, and kept walking. It's not as creepy as other stories, but still, given the situation. The sight of the girl. It's hard to think she wasn't assaulted. I still think of her when I think of my time at that house. Seems like the right place to tell this story. It happened back in 2013. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock, and I was on my way home from a pounds that was sat upstairs, to the back of the bus. There was only me and one other person on the top floor of the bus, and he was sat near the front on the opposite side. When I got up to get off the bus and walked from the back towards the stairs, he called me. I don't remember exactly how he asked, but he was asking for a lighter. I walked up to him, going through my pockets, and told him I had matches, and handed them to him. He took them from me and just stared at them for a good few seconds, and then handed them back to me and said something along the lines of "Don't worry." The time it took him to decide not to use them felt very strange, and the eye contact before and after just felt intense. I walked down the stairs, thinking what the hell was up with that, and then got off the bus. I told a couple of people how weird it felt and described what he was wearing, a Zippo black hoodie with a knockoff Hardy-style tiger on the chest. Fast forward about a week, and there's a fatal stabbing on a bus in my city. A young girl on her way to school was stabbed to death on the top deck of a bus. Stabbings are pretty common in my city, but a young girl being killed on our way to school. That's big news anywhere. They showed a photo of the suspect being arrested, but you can only see the back of his hoodie straight away. I think that's the exact same Ed Hardy knockoff, and start wondering if it's the guy I had seen. When they released more photos of him from the front, I knew it was him. The scary thing is when it transpired. He had recently been let out of a mental health facility. He hadn't been given any support and had been sleeping rough on buses. I've had many interactions with mentally ill people and dangerous individuals, but this one is the one that stays with me. Even though the interaction wasn't much, it felt so strange. I always wonder if he was seeing how I reacted when he asked me, hence why he didn't use the matches. Who knows? It's just a sad story, really. Rest in peace to the poor girl who was murdered. Her name was Christina Atkins. She was just 16 years old. Man knocked on my apartment door because he thought I was a prostitute. I live in an apartment building. And I guess there was a girl with a similar name to mine with long brown hair who moved in. and she was doing dates at her apartment through the internet. He thought I was her and followed me to my apartment. He said he went down to look at the register in the lobby and saw my name. And our names were really similar. Think Kristen and Christine. Well, Brianna and Brianne. Anyway, he followed me, like I said, and then looked at the registry downstairs and just assumed I was this woman. So he knocks on my door. I answer it, and he tells me it's his birthday. Now keep in mind, I have no idea about any of this. And so I say, "Oh, okay, happy birthday." So then he says that he would give me $60 to go and hang out with him and his friends. And that if I wanted to party, he would supply it for me, and that he and his friends would pay me for anything extra. I was completely confused. I said, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't want to go to your birthday party. I don't know you." To which he replied, "Well, I saw your ad on the internet and replied, and you gave this address. And I saw you and blah, blah, blah." He tells me the story like I described in the beginning of this post. I said, "No, that's not me. I am not a prostitute." It was really strange and creepy. I was still somewhat perplexed by this until I told a neighbor a few months later. And apparently this woman got booted from the building because of the traffic to her apartment. I'm glad the management didn't get as confused, as we live on different floors. The complaints of traffic were specific to her apartment, thank goodness. This happened when I was 17. I was walking home from a party and it was pretty late. Probably around 4:30 to 5 a.m. One of my guy friends had decided to walk me home since he didn't want me to walk alone so late. The streets were empty, and it was pitch black. And as we were walking and chatting, we noticed that a man is walking up to us. When he approaches us, he starts saying over and over again, "Hey, I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy, I promise." He didn't seem threatening. And I remember that I didn't feel scared. Maybe because I was with my friend who was an athletic person. So this guy starts asking us for money to buy a sandwich and insists that he can't return home until 10 a.m. because his neighbor has a restraining order against him. Apparently the neighbor leaves for work at that hour. At that point, we were like, what the fuck is going on? We decided to give him some money, so he would leave us alone. We gave him around €5, which is more than enough to buy a sandwich. We then lied and told him that's all we had. Then this man looks at me and says, "No, that's not true. You have more money in your wallet. I can see it from here." At that point, I just put my wallet back into my pose and told him I couldn't give him more money. As we were walking away from this man, he once again catches up to us and says, "Why don't you guys come with me to try and find a vending machine? And that way you make sure I'm not spending your money on drugs." I don't exactly remember what we told him, but there was no way we were going anywhere with him, even though I didn't feel scared or threatened at that moment. In hindsight, it was kind of creepy. I'm just glad my friend insisted on walking me home. Was he just desperate for money? Or did he have other intentions? Hi, everyone, this situation has been ongoing for many, many months. And I'm interested to hear others' perception and any possible advice. I have lived in my apartment complex since 2021. It's a pretty big place with lots of buildings, lots of people and lots of dogs. I have a dog myself, who is unfortunately reactive. I genuinely just keep to myself when walking her and pivot if we see someone walking towards us. Many months ago, I started seeing this guy show up at the same time I walked my dog. He would be walking to the dog park on the far back entrance. He sees how my dog is and makes no attempt to give us space. In fact, there are times where he even gets closer to us. This has happened for months. I begin to think maybe he's just dance unaware or whatever. And think maybe he's just trying to let his dog play early in the morning before work. So I start taking my dog out 30 minutes earlier. He starts coming out at the same time to 30 minutes earlier. Again, he does not try to avoid me even when I'm actively trying to get away from him. He's never said a word to me. He's constantly showing up right after I leave no matter what time or how often I deviate from my schedule. The other day I was out with my mom walking my dog, and we see him across the parking lot walking towards us. He has always expected me to move out of the way even though I'm there first. Plus, my dog is going to the bathroom so I can't move. He walks like 2 feet to the right of us. So of course my dog is going ballistic. My mom noticed too, and said, "That's weird." Well, tonight, it happened again. I said screw it, I will move out of his way because I don't want to deal with a headache. So I move off the sidewalk and walk next to this fence, keeping my dog on a tight leash because she's freaking out. As we're almost right next to each other, but several feet apart, I look over and see he's kinda behind me and still walking towards the park. I get back on the sidewalk and my dog suddenly jumps behind me in a protective stance. I turn around, and this man was standing less than 10 feet behind me facing me and staring, not saying a word. What are your thoughts? And how should I address this creepy neighbor?